So it seems that the UK is running up to the point of basically regulating itself off the internet because our government is full of lunatics who think they're in control of the entire universe and think the universe should bow down to them because they managed to get into power under a chancing Labour government. And this, you will be surprised to learn, began with the Conservatives, right? So this is the Competition and Markets Authority. And what they do is make sure that the market is fair. As you can say, we help people, businesses, and the UK economy by promoting competitive markets and tackling unfair behaviour. Right. They carry on to tell us, we take actions against businesses and individuals that take part in cartels or anti-competitive behaviour. Okay, fair enough. That sounds like a useful thing. We protect people from unfair trading practices. Sounds good. We investigate entire markets if we think there are competition or consumer problems. Okay, I can see why this agency exists. We encourage government and other regulators to use competition effectively on behalf of consumers, and we carry out regulatory appeals in relation to issues like price controls. Okay, this seems like a very useful thing to have. It seems like it should have some authority over the market, but not complete domination of the market. You can see why it exists. And then Kemi Badenoch came along, and she created and sponsored a bill called the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act 2024. This was brought in by Kemi Badenoch under the Conservatives, so you see her sponsoring it from the Department for Business and Trade, and Lord Offord of Garvell from the Department of Business and Trade also co-sponsoring it. And what this is to do is provide regulation and competition in digital markets to amend the Competition Act of 1998 and the Enterprise Act of 2002, and to make other provision about competition law, to make provision relating to the protection of consumer rights, and to confer further such rights for connected purposes. Now, that, of course, is just legalistic bureaucratic waffle. That means nothing. What is that actually going to do? Are we going to update an act from 1998? Okay, fine. But in what way? And so there have been people bringing attention to this saying, hang on a second, this is actually kind of crazy what this is going to do, and it's hypothetically going to give the UK government, we say it will give them sweeping control of US tech, but it won't actually give us control over it. It will make us make demands over US tech companies, which they aren't actually obligated to fulfill, and they could just say, screw your market. You know, you're only like 65 million or 69 million people. We're not going to do anything for you, and we don't have to.
What of the UK's soft power?
Well, that's
what of our soft power?
That's the point.
We can't get Musk under heel. What is the use of our soft power?
That's the point. And so I'm gonna quote quite extensively from this because I haven't deep dived into it, but this author has. I can't remember who it is, but we'll find out.
I think it said Ashley Rinsberg at the top.
That's right, Ashley Rinsberg. Sorry. And it's kind of crazy just how far they're going. So she starts with the example. In 2022, Adobe announced that it was going to acquire interface design software company Figma, which I'm sure there's a real name, for $20 billion, right? And this seems fine. It was in the depth of a tech recession. And then a little more than a year later, the companies would pronounce the deal dead, killed by insurmountable regulatory hurdles. But it wasn't the FTC in America that did this. No, it was the UK regulator, located thousands of miles from the company's Silicon Valley headquarters, called the Competition and Markets Authority. The scuttling of the biggest American tech deal in months by a foreign regulator provoked outrage in the US, understandably so, with commentators arguing that if this continued, American companies would eventually have to abandon the British market entirely. And if you're someone like Facebook, you've got 3 billion users, and 66 billion of them, or 69 billion, whatever it is, become a bit of a problem, and that means you have to restructure and reorganize and pay out huge amounts of money as well, which we'll get to in a minute. Do you restructure your entire world business based in the United States that isn't making you do this to the tune of billions and millions of dollars, or do you just accept that's a market segment, a very small 65 million or 69 million out of 3 billion is a very small number, you just accept that as a loss and also, you carry on?
As we know, an economy that is increasingly poor.
Yeah.
Americans constantly, I've seen, are staggered by what the median wage is in the UK and what the average wage is. Because compared to America, we are staggeringly poor.
Well, Britain is currently a developing country. It's a country that's going backwards economically. It's not It's not good. And so she carries on. In May, the British Parliament passed the Digital Markets and Competition Act. It'll be in here somewhere.
I already had that on screen.
Right, sorry.
Just a little bit up here.
Yeah. In May, the British Parliament passed the Digital Markets and Competition Consumers Act, which gives the CMA sweeping new powers over companies around the world. Or at least it claims the powers over the companies. Again, the companies don't have to do it. They will just have to not operate in Britain. Okay, what power does the British government have to force Facebook or Google or YouTube or Apple or whoever to pay fines in Britain? And the answer is none.
Could you imagine, does the BBC broadcast in other countries?
Yes.
Yeah, could you imagine if they all of a sudden demanded a claim over the right of how the BBC operates?
The BBC would say, well, I will either have to agree to it or stop broadcasting in your country.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think that this is just a strategic failure on behalf of the government.
Yeah, and it's not like there aren't precedents for this. The European Union has tried this with Google, like with Google News, and they just pulled out of Spain. And in Australia as well, they've tried this, and they just pull out. They say, no, screw you, we're not going to do it. And so the EU and Australia have walked back on these, and the UK will do that too. This is just incredibly short-sighted. But anyway, we'll carry on, because, again, I just want you to understand the scope of this, right? So the DMU has the power to create bespoke regulatory conditions for companies. So, for example, Apple will have a set of regulatory conditions developed specifically for Apple, whereas Google will have their own set of rules to abide by, and so on. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? So, okay, so we're going to give preferential treatment to certain companies and not others. So Apple, with woke Tim Cook, will get an entirely different set of regulatory apparatus that applies to him than, say, based Elon Musk and his ex. That's not good, because obviously Apple are going to be far more amenable, and so they're going to be shaking hands a lot more with this organisation under the Labour government, whereas Elon Musk may well be forced to simply pull out of the UK entirely. What?
Oh, in my mind, I've just got an image of the UK government like Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, just going to Elon Musk, you underestimate my soft power.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what's happening here. But the Conservatives are the ones who are like, yeah, let's give this thing extra powers. Oh, look, a Labour government has come in, and now they get to use it exactly how they wish. And so, anyway, that allows essentially the government and agencies of the government to play favourites with foreign companies. So if you have an Elon Musk, he can't even appeal to the rule of law. He can't appeal to a consistent standard. That, I mean, as I say, this is a departure from competition.
And the UK government is notoriously bad at all of this stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm also reading Harry's mind. You have BlackRock in mind.
Well, I mean, BlackRock is an extension of the global government. Anyway.
It could be anything, And so the point being, it could well be that it's just not in Elon's interest to pay the billions of pounds or dollars of fines that we levy and just to pull out the UK market. So we now lose access to X, which I think would be a really, really bad thing, because it's a very effective tool for communication and very politically important, and they know it. And so they point out that this is a massive departure from like competition law, which used to be a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, as in, it was fair. It wasn't politically partisan. It was in the spirit of how law should work.
How would this affect, say, like Amazon, who are presumably one of the biggest retailers in the UK?
I assume that they would have to either pay the costs, get a personalised, custom-made deal with this agency, or pull out. I imagine.
Could you imagine Amazon pulling out of the UK right now?
No, I mean, I'd be heartbroken by it, because I use Amazon all the time because I'm terrible. But basically, I imagine that Amazon is big enough to take the hit and just pay whatever they're supposed to do, and just I'm sure they'll have like. I expect that there's going to be some sort of goodwill, right? And so they'll be like, no, Amazon's basically a left-wing company. We agree, Amazon will do everything and say everything. It'll push all the diversity stuff, whatever.
So they go, well, it did make the Hobbits black, so
exactly.
You get a free pass.
Amazon isn't going to be the problem. It's going to be Twitter that's going to be the problem. And they're going to get rid of it for that reason. Or potentially could, right? But they say, basically, and this is, again, another very interesting part, right? The more significant piece of the DMCC is that the companies will operate under an ex-ante framework, In competition law, again at least until now, remedies prescribed by regulators, such as forced divestiture or cessation of offending certain market activities, come as a result of an investigation which concludes that there has been a breach of the relevant law. So regulatory intervention takes place after the violation, right? Though subtle, the ex-ante approach represents a full paradigm shift in competition law. Before the shift, companies would have had little to no interference or interface with regulators. That is, until an investigation had been opened. So, innocent until proven guilty, right? But instead, they are assumed to be compliant with a broad range of practices, blah, blah, blah. The assumption by governments under an ex-post framework is that companies are actually competing naturally and fairly. But in the ex-ante frameworks, flips this dynamic on its head. Companies that are given SMS status in the UK or gatekeeper status in the EU are automatically assumed to be in potential, if not actual, breach of competition law. So the government steps in preemptively with a set of regulations tailored to ensure that each, by their own measure, that this hypothetical situation would be anti-competitive practices never comes about. So this ex-ante approach to regulation was inspired, of course, by the European Union's own regulatory overhaul, the Digital Markets Act. So that's completely changing the dynamic of a market.
Well, this is very, very similar to how DEI law has worked in America for decades, where it's automatically assumed past a certain point that you are probably breaking DEI law and, with unfair hiring practices, which has meant that all of these companies have automatically put all of these HR regulations in place to make sure that they're kind of bulletproof legally, which has led to a lot of the unfair hiring practices over there, because it costs less overall for them to put all of that in place and start unfairly hiring people and discriminating, rather than waiting for some aggrieved party to launch a case at them.
Yeah, and so this is just kind of crazy. And as they point out, we're literally just lifting this from the European Union. So what happened to Brexit? Why would we do this? I don't think this is a good idea at all. And of course, this has been done by the purportedly pro-Brexit conservatives and just handed straight to Starmer. So now he can start legally persecuting American companies that side with Donald Trump against those that sided with Kamala Harris, and privileging those ones, and deprive us of those services if they don't pay vast amounts of money, which I'll tell you about in a minute.
I think that we will have several statements of this sort in the following months, and this rhetoric will intensify, because I think that it is sort of muscle flexing, and they're anticipating Trump's tariffs.
Yeah.
So both sides now, they're saying, no, I'm going to harm you more.
But I think it was probably unlikely that Trump was going to put tariffs on Britain.
Well, whatever. It's just,
but
I don't think Keir Starmer has the best of disposition towards.
No, of course not. But this
was put forward by the Conservatives, though.
Exactly, but this is being handed to Keir Starmer, who's just going to exacerbate the problem, obviously. And so, crazy how we're just lifting European legislation. And they point out that basically anything that you do with this then kind of forces the companies to have to get through the narrow corridors of the regulation to get to the end, which is you, the consumer, which puts hurdles in their way that makes your experience worse. And they give the example of, Google can't preference its own search engine according to, say, European law, and so they can't just take you to a Google Maps location if you're looking for a business on Google. You can't just click on it. No, you get an image and you have to separately search it. Purportedly, that means you could pull up another different search engine or something like that. But this is obviously a noticeably worse outcome for consumers, who are not the people who are actually being held in.
So you've got to jump through a load of extra hoops to get the same result.
Yes.
So it's just a worse consumer experience.
Precisely. And this is supposed to be anti-competition law, but to protect the market. Well, who are we protecting the market for? Well, now it's for the good of the market itself, not the good of the consumer, right? So, anyway, they point out that most prominent consequences among this are that companies are just keeping major products out of the EU market. So, if you think things are bad now, imagine when literally everyone else on Earth has a brand new kind of phone that does some new fancy thing, but Britain just doesn't have access to it. We are going to end up falling behind technologically. People in Africa will have better phones than you because they won't have these insane regulations.
Because ironically, the Tony Blair Institute will be handing them out for free.
Yeah.
Whereas our own
and you won't be able to get access to them
our
yourself.
Own Blairite government
will not let you have them because of excessive overregulation. it's kind of mental. Like, and they've got examples of this. Like, Google has decided to not offer its AI search assistant to EU customers. So if you buy a Google phone, you won't get the advanced AI search that doubtless is amazing at what it does. Apple has issued downgrades of its iPhone 16 for European customers, which doesn't come with its own AI search engine, which the company admitted was directly due to concerns that the AI product could potentially violate these kind of regulations.
I love this because what
are we doing?
What it essentially does is forces companies to make their products worse.
Yes. That's exactly what it does.
Purposefully encouraging a leveling of all standards.
Yes.
As everything in the modern world does.
Yes.
You literally can't have nice things because they have regulated nice things out of the equation.
Other countries will have nice things, just we won't. And again, like the phones and various other technology in this effect, not coming preloaded with stuff. It's like, oh great, so now I have to do that myself. If I want that. I don't want to have to do that. I'm not like a techie guy. I don't want to be a techie guy. Like, there are going to be millions and millions of people who are just like, why doesn't my phone do what it was supposed to do? What the other guys I saw on the internet have. Yeah, no, you don't get that. So they're depriving us just to have excessive government control, right? And so anyway, they say that if breaches of these rules, and there's a reason these companies are doing this, because of course the companies themselves don't want to do this. They want to be like, yeah, bam, this is the best thing you'll ever get. Go buy it now, buy it now. Of course that's what the company wants, but they avoid doing it because it can result in fines of up to 10% of a company's global revenue, right? So if, again, using the example of Facebook, 3 billion customers globally, God knows how much money Facebook is worth, how much they bring in every year. But if 69 million of those, which is, again, a tiny fraction of the overall revenue, are making a claim on the global revenue, why would you take that risk? If you're Facebook, you're like, no, I'm just out of that market. No, I don't care what the boomers say. We're out. They're not getting their AI slop. I'm sorry. Which is out of Britain now.
I think we should remember, though, what it says there. It says a penalty that former European Commissioner for Internal Market and Services, Thierry Breton, used as a threat against Elon Musk.
I was going to get to that. Yes, he did make that explicit threat to Elon Musk.
Yes, because
2 weeks ago.
He was constantly one of the most, aggressively censorious voices there.
Yeah. I mean, in the EU, it's worse. It can go up to 20% of global revenue, which is crazy.
How did it work for him?
Well,
he lost his job.
Yeah, he got fired.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk just kind of repudiated him. But again, who knows how unbelievably hard-headed the Labour government's going to be over this. It could be that we literally end up losing access to services online that you took for granted. Again, I don't know what the consequence of all this is going to be. I'm just putting this on your radar because, by the way, the UK government could end up doing something really bonkers.
And for all of the traditionalists watching this who, like myself, Carl and Stelios and others, will be saying, well, wouldn't it be better if we have less access to the internet, if people have more reason to communicate with one another, if people have less reason to go online and buy off Amazon and instead use their local amenities and such. The government's not doing it for that reason. Yeah. These are technocrats, but they are low IQ, idiotic technocrats who are just trying to get an easy score on money.
Yeah, and I mean, hypothetically, that might all end up accidentally being good. But
they might accidentally reverse engineer Trumpton.
Yeah, exactly. But they're not doing it for that reason. What they're going to do is turn us into a global backwater.
Exactly. And actually, they're going to go after critics.
Yeah.
They're not going to be like the Republican congressmen of the ads going after gooners and stuff.
Anyway, she carries on pointing out in this article that the definitions that they're going to use are, of course, very, very vague and able to be manipulated for whatever purpose they want. They say that, they need a 33% of the market share to be applicable for this kind of penalty. But as one London-based law firm expert explains, the 33% share of supply test is extremely broad, and as any seasoned advisor knows, it will be hard in most cases to establish that an acquirer does not have a 33% share based on some cut of the market or permutation of supply that they could use to establish jurisdiction. So if a company is like, producing 33% of phones, they could be, yeah, but it's 33% of phones that have this particular camera in this particular configuration with that particular software or something. And actually, you're 40% of those. So it's like, okay, great. So you could just wangle it to be anyone you want.
Probably with Amazon, I don't know, they are probably a massive share. But if they were able to argue, oh, we're not 33% of all online sellers, they'll probably be able to go, but you're more than that in book sales.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You're more than that in shoe sales or some random thing.
They can narrow or expand the categories to be convenient to themselves. So this isn't even a hard thing. But anyway, non-compliance with investigations can result in a fine of 1% of global revenues on companies, which is around 20 grand or something per day for non-compliance for individuals. Right. So 1% of, if you're a company, it's 1% of your global revenue. But if you're an individual, £15,000 a day for non-compliance. So you basically have to either do this or pull out, right? They're not gonna allow you to continue. And so Elon Musk basically pulled this to people's attention. This is how I found out about it, because it's like, oh, actually, great. So the guy who owns Twitter, a platform I use all the time and I think is very useful, is like, I'm watching you, UK. For some reason, it seems that the UK is going to set themselves against Elon Musk. I think that's a terrible idea because I like access to his properties, his platforms, and I just hate the kind of increasing dystopian bureaucratic control our country is falling into. So again, don't know what the end of the result of this is going to be, just putting it on your radar.
I hope you appreciate that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can always follow our series Lads Hour, this one about fixing every country. It's a good bit of fun. If you want to see all the other things we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.